As a member of a pioneering Alaskan family, Patrick O'Neill's interest in the far north dates back to the Klondike Gold Rush. Pat's grandfather came north in the 1890s, eventually settling down in the Alaska coastal community of Cordova and establishing a family. In 1917, just 20 years after Pat's grandfather climbed the Chilkoot Pass, the Alaska Agricultural College and School of Mines was established in Fairbanks. In the 30s, Pat, who was one of a dozen children, followed his older brother William O'Neill north to Fairbanks, the site of the territory's only college. Pat graduated in 1941 at the ripe old age of 26, having stopped and started several times in order to finance his college career. Armed with a degree in mining engineering, Pat embarked on what was to be a distinguished career, taking him to exotic points on the globe, making deals in financial capitals of the world. Pat's still busy 50 years after graduating, but he still finds time to remember his grandfather.
He came up during the gold rush, I believe it was 98. He had come over from Liverpool. His family had moved from Ireland into Liverpool during the famine, and he was born in Liverpool. He came over and started working on the railroads across the United States. He was working on the northern route. And while he was based in Fargo, North Dakota, he met my grandmother there. She was working in the parish house. They got married and had 9 children, I think it was. But then when the gold rush came along in 98, he left the family and went to the Yukon, to Alaska, came in over the Chilkoot Pass. He was there at the time when they had the big slide and buried an awful lot of people. He helped dig out a lot of those. And he went on into to Dawson, and by the time the great majority of the people got in there, the ground was all staked and claims were held, so he didn't do very well gold mining. But he stayed on to help to build the country. He came back down to Skagway and worked on the construction of the White Pass and Yukon Railway from Skagway into Whitehorse. When that was finished, he went out to the States, to Fargo, and moved his family out to Seattle. And a couple of his sons, older, came up with him at that time, and they worked on packing pack horses out of Valdez into the Kennecott area, McCarthy area. They were getting started with the construction of the mine and mill even before they started the railroad out of Cordova. Originally, they'd started out of Valdez and then Catella and finally Cordova. So he was working on the layout of the foreman on the layout of the town of Cordova when he got word my dad and mother had gotten married in Seattle. My mother was 20 and my dad was 17 when they got married, and they'd already had 2 children by that time. So he picked out a lot in Cordova and sent them a ticket, and they came up to Cordova. I think it was about 1907 or 8, something like that. And he continued working on the construction of the railroad up to the Kennecott copper mines. And he was killed in a cave-in in the last tunnel they put in at Chitna in 1911, the year they finished the railroad. They were working on that when he was killed.
Now, your grandfather and your family, were there all 12 of the children that were living in Cordova at the time, or were they dispersed?
Well, we were all living in Cordova at that time. When he bought the ticket for my dad and mother to come up, my dad went to work in a tent store. Cordova was just getting founded, with a fellow named Sam Blum. Later became the Blum and O'Neill Company. And then when Sam died, my dad bought out Mrs. Blum, and it became the O'Neill Company. And the other 10 of us were born in Cordova. The first 2 were born in Seattle. So we were all 12 there in Cordova and had the biggest house in town and had a great time. It was a great place there.
What your family made up? What percentage of the town then?
Well, quite a little of it. At its peak, Cordova was about 3,000 people. Oh. After the railroad shut down, it dropped way down, and it's still, I think, about 1,200, mostly a fishing village there. I was there with my family 1980 when we have 2 children that are now 22 and 19. And when the youngest one turned 8, we started to travel, so I brought him to Alaska first, and I showed him the spot on the sidewalk in Cordova where I was shoveling snow. Spring, I was 15 years of age, and my dad came by with a fellow that I knew to be superintendent of a mine where my brother Bill was foreman. So as they went by, this fellow said, gee, Harry, that kid's pretty handy with a shovel. Is that one of yours? And Dad said, yeah, that's Pat. And I said, how about a job in your mine, Mr. Kramer? He said, how old are you? And I said, 18. And my dad sort of blinked, but with 12 kids, he didn't know how old anybody was. And he said, Mr. Kramer said, if it's all right with you, Harry, I can use them. And Dad said, fine. So that's how I got started working in mining. But when I showed up at Chittitu when school was out my junior year, my brother Bill was a little annoyed about it. He thought I was too young, although he had started when he was 15. But he thought I was too young and too small and said if I couldn't keep up with the men, I'd have to go down the creek. So but I did stay, and I worked there for 4 summers.
Now,
with Bill.
The mines there were copper ore, was what
Well,
you're
the
looking
Kennecott
for?
was a copper mine, big copper mine, but we worked out of McCarthy on Chittitu Creek. There were Chittitu and Dan Creek, which were hydraulic gold mines, little hydraulic gold mines. So I'd never been to Kennecott until this trip 2 weeks ago. Went up to look at it. I'd gone in and out of McCarthy, but I'd never gone up to Kennecott. So I worked there for 4 seasons in those mines.
How was that visit, taking your daughter Erin told me that you did take her on that tour, and how was it sort of explaining this to yet another generation of O'Neills?
That was fun. It was interesting. She remembered being in Cordova in 1980 with us, so this time up at Kennecott and McCarthy. An aunt that was a favorite aunt of ours had been a school teacher at Eagle first and then at Kennecott, and then married my uncle in McCarthy. I had 2 uncles in McCarthy that had a store, J.B. O'Neill and Company. And she always talked about Kennecott and McCarthy, and so my wife, and she came to visit us every year for many, many years, and loved Sandra very much, my wife, and so Sandra was anxious to see it, so we went to see it. It was fun.
Now, you went to elementary school and high school in Cordova.
Correct.
And why did you decide to come to Fairbanks to go to school?
Well, interesting enough, that school in Cordova where I went to when I had the family there in 1980, we walked up the hill, and I said to the kids, this is where I went to school. And they said, what grades did you go there? And I said, all of them, from first through high school. And my daughter said, gee, Dad, that isn't as big as our house. That's where I went to school, through high school. No, after I got out of high school, I wanted to, I talked to an old fellow up in the mines, and Bill was coming to college at the time too, but the fellows were talking about they didn't make enough money in the summer, they could go down to Arizona or someplace in the winter and sit by the pool and enjoy life. I thought that would be a great life. But this one old fellow who was 65 at the time, he said, you know, you're a fool if you don't go to college. You've got an opportunity. He said, this sounds all right to you now, but when you get my age and you're getting out every morning on a pick and shovel, it's tough. It really is. So my advice to you is to go to college. And that sort of confirmed that I wanted to go. So I spoke to my dad, and after the railroad shut down and things were going bad, I knew he couldn't help me any much, but I told him I'd like to go, and he said, well, I hope you can make it. I knew he meant financially. I often wondered afterwards if he didn't mean intellectually as well. But anyway, I wrote, he said, write to Judge Bunnell. So I wrote, and he offered me a job as a janitor for my room and board. So I came on up to college, and I worked 3 years as a janitor. Then we took a year off. I went out to the States with that hockey team as assistant manager of that with Glenn Franklin. And
you were athletic director of...
Athletic manager, student athletic manager.
For the hockey team, or...
For the whole athletics here at the college at that time.
You mentioned President Bunnell offered you this position. Perhaps you have some other recollections. I've understood that President Bunnell made it very easy for students to come to the university, or encouraged it. Is that your sense of what he was like?
Very much so, yes. Very encouraging. He went around, traveled around a lot trying to get students to come also. So he was looking for students. But he was very fortunate I was able to get the job as a janitor. But at that time, I think almost the entire student body was self-supporting. Certainly in part, if not entirely, and most of us were entirely self-supporting. So we needed the job, and it was great.
Now, when you first started to school, the university was still under the name of the Alaska Agricultural College and School of Mines.
Correct.
And that changed during your tenure there, is that
Yes.
correct?
1935, it became accredited as a university and became the University of Alaska in 1935.
And how many structures were on the campus then? And I assume you lived on campus as well?
Oh, yes, yeah, everybody. I think they know they were town students that came out from town every day. Early on, they came out by rail, and then later they started a bus service about the time I came. There was the old main building, the big building where all our classes and everything were held. There was a garage, which was right across from what is now Signers Hall, and then the two dormitories, the boys and the girls, men and women, and the power plant was back behind. There were a couple of houses. Bunnell had a house down on the point of the brow of the hill, and I remember Dean Duckering and a couple of the others. Patty family had houses on the campus, and they had a couple of buildings back behind, which was the that wasn't agricultural. It was sort of where they had muskox and things of that sort. And then the what is now Signers Hall was built, I think either the year I came or just before. It was brand new. That was the library was upstairs and the gymnasium down before. I think it was built after I came because the library originally was in the old main building when I first came, my first year here. I was janitor on the main floor, so I used to get a lot of chance to talk to Judge Bunnell. He'd come over on Sunday mornings, always when I was sweeping there and stop to talk. I used to think it was because I had a hangover and he was giving me a bad time, but it was really it was a very interesting time. I learned a lot about what he thought about the university or the college and what it was going to be, where it was going to go.
He had a sense of vision even then?
Oh, tremendous. Tremendous. When he talked about the, I mentioned this at the talk I gave at his dedication of his statue, he would go on at great length about what the university was going to be. It was going to be thousands of students someday. It was going to be all these big fancy buildings, and I just thought he was dreaming. Yeah, a few years later, when I came up, I used to come up regularly on visits. My brother Bill was on the board of trustees for 25 years, president the last few years of his tenure, and he was chairman of the building committee, and he showed me these tremendous plans they had for buildings up on the ridge and all these places down or the farm where I used to work in the spring, helping them plow the ground and all that. And I said, Bill, you're as much of a dreamer as Bunnell. You guys are really, this is never going to be like that. It's all here and more. They really were. No, Bunnell was a man of great vision and great determination. And he knew everybody, he knew everything, he knew everything that was going on. You couldn't get away with anything on the campus. He knew it.
He was sort of the driving force of what we're witnessing today at the university.
Correct. He really was. He was a man of great vision and determination.
Now, you graduated in 1941, is that correct? And World War II was going on at that time?
Yes.
And so
well, we weren't in the war yet until December of 41, as you know. No, we had our draft. They started the draft, I think, early in 41, and I had already signed up for the Air Force as an aviation cadet because we had that civilian pilot training program here at the university, and I'd taken that. So I had signed up for the Air Force, and I wasn't called, however, until December the 7th of 1941, and I enlisted on December the 8th. But everyone was getting called up and getting draft notices at that time in 41 before we graduated. In fact, we had to get permission to wait until we graduated in early 41.
And then you spent some time in the military but came back to Fairbanks?
Yes, I was 4 years in the Air Force and came back to Fairbanks in early 46 and worked for the U.S. Smelting Company.
That's USSR&M?
United States Smelting, Refining, and Mining Company. Originally it was called the Fairbanks Exploration Company. Then it became the United States Smelting, Refining, and Mining Company, and later on, years later, changed its name to Alaska Gold Company, which I think it is today. But I was Came back as exploration engineer for them, and then got into the dredging, and I was dredge superintendent the last 3 or 4 years I was here.
Was that sort of at the heyday of the dredging operations in the interior, or what was the mining operations like during those times?
Well, we were operating 7 dredges at that time when I became dredge superintendent. We were getting beyond the peak. We were going downhill. The reserves were running out, and it was getting the peak had been really earlier on in the 30s, especially when the price of gold went up in 35 or 36. The price of gold went up from $20 to $35, and it became very profitable and very, very good. And those were the best days of the company. During the war, they were pretty well shut down, and after the war, then they resumed operation. I got another degree in 1953. I had written a thesis and got the things. I'd had 2 degrees in 41 and then this one in 53. And while I was working on that degree on my thesis, I was also working on plans for the rest of the life of the dredging operations for the U.S. smelting. And it looked like most of the operations were going to be finished in 1963. And I didn't have any intentions at all of leaving Alaska, but I thought that, you know, if it's going to be finished in 10 years and I'll still be relatively young, I better get busy and look for something else. But I sort of put the thought out of my mind. But I was out to see Earl Beislein about my thesis. And when we got through, we were walking down the hall, and he stopped to talk to somebody, and the bulletin board was right there. There was a letter from South American Gold and Platinum Company in New York, wanting to know if any of the new graduates wanted to go work in dredging operations in South America, in Colombia. I didn't know where Colombia was. I asked Earl when he got through, is anyone going? And he said, no, I'm writing this afternoon to tell them that all of the fellows have jobs lined up. I said, well, just for the heck of it, tell them you know an experienced placer engineer that might be interested in going. So I got a telegram back in a few days for more information, which sent off, and another telegram, please come to New York for interview. And so I took a few days off and went to New York for interview and hired out to go to South America. Came back and packed up, and away I went.
Well, so it was more or less a fluke. That,
it really was. It was just happenstance. And same as getting the job in the mines, shoveling snow alongside the store. But so I went down to Colombia, and I thought at first I'd really made an awful mistake. It was hot and humid and dirty, and the conditions were terrible. And if there'd been a plane out the first week, I'd have been on it. But there wasn't one for 10 days, and then I decided to stick it out. And it turned out to be the most challenging and interesting time of my life, really. It was wonderful.
In the 50s, South America, certainly conditions there, even today, are in some parts not the best in the world. What was it like in the 50s when you were there?
Well, so many of the companies were treating the people very poorly. They were not taking care of their workers. Or in this operation I went to in the Choco and Andagoya in Colombia, South American Gold and Platinum Company, they were operating 5 dredges there, and I was the chief engineer. And the company was losing money. They set me down with the idea that they wanted to turn it around. Well, we wanted to make improvements in the dredges to speed up the bucket lines, to put on larger buckets, to put on jigs where it was necessary, do a lot of testing and things. But with the level of the people that they had working, it was very difficult. The people were all still barefoot. The women were, for the most part, bare-breasted, and the men just wore loincloth, and it's pretty hard to do, and none of them were literate. Everybody used their thumbprint to sign the payroll. There were only 1 or 2 in the whole workforce that could write their name, other than the office staff, of course, who were Colombians from outside, but the local natives were very illiterate. So it was a real challenge, and I kept writing back to New York and saying, we have to do this. We have to increase their wages. We have to improve their housing conditions. We have to improve the hospital. We have to put in better schools, and so forth. They had come back and say, when you start making money, we'll do these things. And so after a year of fighting that battle, I turned in my resignation. But just about that time, Sam Lewison, who was the principal owner of South American Gold and Platinum, died, and his wife had to sell the stock for tax reasons. And a fellow named Louis Harder was broker with Harris Upton. He placed the stock with his family and friends, and they came down to take a look at what they had bought just before I left, and I told them what I thought they had to be done, but I couldn't make any progress, so I was leaving, and they said, well, hang on, we'll do something, and I went back and had a proxy fight and got control of the company, and I was moved to New York as vice president in charge, and they gave me a free hand to do what I had to do, which we did. We had many more workers than what we needed because the health was so poor that they were off sick all the time. So the first thing we did was to get some consultants in and rebuild the hospital. We were required by law to have 3 doctors, so we started rotating them overseas to the U.S. for medicine, to study industrial medicine, so that we could keep people from getting sick rather than just take care of them when they were sick. And that was a great help. We put in x-rays and laboratories so we could identify the illness. It cut down the cost tremendously, because without a laboratory, they were just giving people a whole bag full of drugs, which were very expensive. And that worked out great, and we started a school. They'd been required by law to have 3 years of school, but all they had was an old building that was falling down with a couple of boards painted black, and an illiterate teacher, and not even any chalk or pencil or paper. So we started a proper school system and hired teachers from outside. We got social workers to come in to teach the women to sew and make clothes and to dress properly. And we got the equipment and materials for the people to fix up their houses, and we rebuilt their houses, put in plumbing and so forth.
So you recognized that sense of responsibility long before the buzzword of corporate responsibility became fashionable.
Well, it was the only thing we could do to get the thing to make money, to get the operation to make money. So we were able to reduce people over a period of time with attrition. We cut down greatly on the number of people, so we were able to pay them better. I went down, when I first went there, I'd go down with these people to the river bank. They bought all their food along the river. People would come up in their canoes with bananas and rice and meat and things. And the salary these people were getting, they couldn't buy enough for a family of 4. And they all had a lot of children. We also put in a church and got a priest in there. Everyone had common law wives, and they'd have 2 or 3 women, so they were having 2 or 3 children a year. And the population explosion was tremendous, and the financial burden on these people and on the company was intolerable.
I know you see the value of research. Is there any thoughts that you have as the university goes into its 75th year of existence on how, as an institution, it's made a difference, not only to you personally, but to the state of Alaska?
Well, I think tremendously with the research activities. The first, I think, involvement of the university in research was on the Aurora Borealis and all that, with Beryl Fuller and Bramhall afterwards. It was on the leading edge. When Terry Moore came on as president and instrumental in getting the Geophysical Institute here, and that was Bunnell's idea before several years before he retired. He wanted to get a new president to replace him who had the contacts in the research and technical aspects in the world, and of course Terrace Moore had from Boston and as the head of the Boston Museum of Science before, and an internationally known mountain climber and explorer, member of the Explorers Club. He was also a member of the American Geographical Society, which I've been on the board for many years, and many other things. And so it started with the Geophysical Institute and its Arctic research, and then it went into marine research. And I think the university has played a tremendous part, and I think the research publications and bulletins they put out have been of great benefit to the state.
Right. How would you explain to people in the community that sometimes say that research really doesn't have a direct effect on my life? Do you see that there is a connection there, and that a university is not sort of separate entity from a community? Do you see that there's a coalescing, if you will, of the two?
I think anyone recognizes that research is important to their life, and certainly when the university or the college first started, the people of Fairbanks were not supporters of it particularly, because it was 4 miles away, which was a long way in that time, when the bus would break down halfway and get stuck in the mud and so forth. It seemed like a remote place. But it didn't take long before they realized the importance of the university to the community and the value of having the university here and the people that it brought here. Fairbanks was always a town of people of intellect and of interest and community spirit. And it's like any isolated, more or less isolated town in the world. People get together and work together and do things, a little theater and discussion groups and things of that sort. The university greatly helped that, and many of the professors lived in town, many of the students lived in town, so it was a real part of the community. And to me, it's just amazing that it's all grown up from Fairbanks right out to the campus here, all along the road.
I want to thank you very much.
Already?
Yes.
Seems like we hardly started.